Good afternoon. Is that a little too loud? I'll pull it away from my mouth. Welcome. The Winton Historical Association is sponsoring this today, and Frank Stephenson is talking about herring fishing on the Chowan. Back in our memories, we all remember going down to Tunis and dipping herring out of Catherine Creek or some other spot here in Hereford County. So we welcome him today and welcome all of you. So let me just turn this over to Mr. Stephenson. And
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Herring fishing is something that all of us who grew up in this region, certainly it should be near and dear to you. The real thing that is a puzzle to me is that I thought growing up that we would never see the herrings end and never see the time that you could not catch them. And I grew up with it. I learned herring fishing from my father when I was old enough to go with him on the Herring River north of Murfreesboro, a place called Skinner's Gut. He used to set gill nets and traps, and we would fish for herring and fish for other things. And when I was 4 or 5 years old, and then anybody who lived here, herrings got in your blood and just couldn't get them out. And so through the years, I had an opportunity, and so grateful to the families who you'll see in the presentation today. A lot of them permitted me to photograph their operations and their herring operations, from pine nets to whatever, and I'm very grateful to them, and particularly the Williams family and the family of Tony Stephenson and others that you'll see in the presentation. Extremely grateful to these families for giving me the opportunity to actually photograph. I've photographed this stuff over a period of about 40 years, and who would ever thought that we would never see the day that you could not catch a herring in the Chowan River or its tributaries. So let's take a look back, and hopefully going back through this that you might see a little something that might bring back a memory or flicker something that from your years growing up here, and also those who lived here their adult years. But it is a joy to be here. I appreciate you coming, and let's take a look at some times back and see what we got. Each year in March, April, and May, when there's a full moon over Carolina, when the dogwoods are in bloom, and with the Easter season approaching, the alewife or river herring migrate by the millions to the Chowan River region of North Carolina, as it is one of the prime herring spawning grounds on the east coast of the United States. And for centuries, persons living in the Chowan River region of northeast North Carolina, whether Native Americans, colonists, or 20th century residents, have used various devices, from reed baskets to gill nets to bow nets to river seines, to catch the silvery saltwater fish. The fresh herring, which fed most of eastern North Carolina for several centuries, were there for the taking. The herring were especially valuable during the hard times. And on the right, there's an excerpt from the 1889 poem, The Dutch Lullaby by Eugene Fields, and it says, "We have come to fish for the herring fish that live in the beautiful sea. Nets of silver and gold have we," said Winkin, blinking a nod. I used to read that to my kids when they were little. Archaeologists who've done digs into trash pits belonging to Native American villages along in the Chowan region have found huge quantities of herring bones. While huge quantities of river herring were caught here and consumed by the folks residing in the Chowan River region, millions of herring caught here were salted down and shipped to northern cities. Some of the herring fishing operations on the Chowan River were very large, particularly some of the giant haul seines that operated in the lower part of the river. The Capehart family of Scotch Hall in the lower part of Berkeley County operated some of the largest haul seines on the Chowan River. They were really large. This little note was appeared in the Daily News of Murfreesboro in April 22, 1950. It says, according to Roy Johnson, who wrote this, who published the paper, he said, fishing is great business down on the Chowan River these days. In one section, one day last week, everywhere I went, they were cutting and salting away fish. One lady at the house came out to meet me with a knife in one hand and a herring in the other. So there you go. Only Roy Johnson would write that stuff and dig that stuff up like that. Herring fishing also was huge on many of the Chowan River tributaries, including the Meherrin River. The Meherrin River seines were much smaller than those on the Chowan River, including this one, Madras fishery, which is shown here. And the gentleman on the left holding up the snake, Lewis Griffith, operated a haul seine at the old site of Madras fishery for over 50 years. He was one of my grandmother's 3 brothers who were involved in herring fishing most of their lives. And you'll see another one, Peter Griffith down at Tunis, and she had another brother named Tom who also was involved in herring fishing on the Nottoway River. This is an early view of Lewis Griffith's seine fishery that was located on the Meherrin River about 2 miles below Murfreesboro in Hertford County. That odd-looking thing that it looks like there's a frame holding up something, that is the remains of a windlass where they would attach the end of this of the haul seine net to that, and they would wind it in. A group of men will wind it in, and you'll see that in a little bit coming up in another one. And here they're loading the haul seine of Lewis Griffith's seine fishery. And then across the river, I grew up across the river in Manage Neck, and to get across the river from Manage Neck side over to the Murfreesboro side, he had a small hand walk cable ferry was used to ferry folks from the north side to the south side. I've actually been on that thing many times when I was a boy, because I'd spent a lot of time over there with him. This is the haul seine crew at Griffith's Fishery. Here they were washing herring and following their haul or drag across the Meherrin River. And once the haul seine got in and the fish got up, the herring cutters took over and the lady on the right, actually she cut herring that night at Uncle Lewis's fishery for years, many years. This is another view of Lewis Griffith's fishery on the Meherrin River. At one point, when the herrings were running strong, Griffith utilized a tractor motor to pull the haul seine to shore. In fact, one of those motors may still be there. He used several of them. When Lewis Griffith retired, Eugene Reed on the left operated the same fishery for a few years. And then on the right, the image on the right shows a popular way that people purchase herring, and the way they took them home, they would purchase them a dozen at a time, and they would run a piece of baling wire through their eye sockets and take them home just like that. George Williams on the right followed Eugene Reed as the operator of Lewis Griffith's herring seine. This began a long run of operation of the seine by the Williams family. I remember Mr. George Williams very well, quite well. He was very gracious to let me film down there some of the shoot pictures I know. Here's a view of members of some of the George Williams haul seine dumping the haul seine following a successful haul across the river. Mr. Ms. Dick Williams and family operated the old Griffith haul seine following the retirement of his brother George. The Dick Williams herring haul seine was the last haul seine to operate in North Carolina. Think about that. Of all the haul seines that were in North Carolina, and particularly in eastern North Carolina, there were just all through the years there were scores and scores and scores of them. But that one that Mr. Ms. Williams operated was the last one to operate here in the state of North Carolina. In fact, it may have been one of the last on the East Coast, because I don't think there was any operating in Virginia, and I'm not very familiar with those in South Carolina, but it's probably reason to stand that it was probably the last one operating on the East Coast. In the left image, the hull seine is being loaded on a flat for laying out across the river, and then the image on the right shows that the seine itself being stretched out across the river, being laid out, and then the image on the left, the hull seine is actually stretched out across the river where it will stay for a few minutes, and then slowly. In the right image, the hull seine is being carefully worked to the shore where it's dumped in the fish box, and that's where the actual fun is, to see what the seine brings in, or what you catch, and because you just never know what you might catch in the thing, as you'll see in a little bit. In these two images, the Williams Fisher hull seine crew is shown dumping their latest catch. No two hull seine catches were alike, as some could be large and some could be small, depending on how strong the fish were running, how strong the herons were running. Another view of the Williams hull seine, he is showing another catch where they're dumping into the fish box, and as I mentioned before, you just never knew what you were going to catch, as shown in this image on the left of this big rockfish that was, hey Tim, you remember that?
Yeah, yes sir, I do.
There you go. Yeah. That was a beautiful one. Then the right image, as once the heron had been caught, then the heron cutters take over. And of course, in this image on the right, that's Miss Williams is one of the people cutting herons.
She could cook them too.
Well,
She really could cook.
I'll tell you, that's what we're going to talk about right now.
She's better than anyone now.
I'm telling you right now,
Crispy,
Ms. Williams knew how to cook those things. I mean, there's only one way to cook a heron. I mean, if you don't cook it right, you can't eat the thing. You might as well put it away. I mean, it's just. I mean, I remember one time that we brought the two reporters on the Virginia pilot down there, and those guys had never eaten heron, and of course they couldn't get enough of them, and they wanted to know exactly what they were. They had never had fried herring like that, but it was a real joy to really eat down there. And the family was always gracious enough to invite me to eat with them when I would show up down there, sometimes just to eat, you know. But it was a real pleasure, and very, very grateful for that.
Thank you.
See, some things you never forget in life, and that's one of them. J. Van Jordan of Como in Hertford County operated this hull seine a few miles down the Meharry River from the Williams hull seine. This, in the right image, the hull seine crew is using a windlass to pull the seine to the shore. Down through the years, there were numerous hull seines operating on the Meharry River. A few were on the Nottoway and Blackwater rivers, which converge at the state line to form the Chowan River. And there are two images here of hull seines that were on the Nottoway River. The one on the left is Cotton's fishery, and the one on the right is Edward's fishery. I happened to go there when I was like 5 or 6 years old. My mother came from Southampton, Canada, Virginia, and my grandfather Bishop took me to the one on the right several times when I was a small boy, and never forgot it. But the fish that were caught at these hull seines in Virginia, particularly in the Nottoway and Blackwater rivers, they had to come up the Chowan River to get there. Eugene Reed, in addition to operating what became the Williams hull seine, he also operated this hull seine on the Meharry River at Sandy Shore, just north of Murfreesboro. There were a few other small hull seines on the Meharry River above Murfreesboro, including one at Severn at a place called Brett's Beach. And then there were several even smaller ones up the Meharry River near Emporia, Virginia. I didn't know that until I had a colleague at Chowan named Cliff Collins who grew up around Emporia, and he told me one day that there were a couple of small hull seines up that way he grew up. Now we get into the larger haul seines, in Ely Reed of Winton and Charles L. Rebel of Murfreesboro operated a huge herring haul seine at Chowan Beach, which is located on the Chowan River above Winton in Hertford County. This is Mr. Reed on the left and Mr. Rebel is on the right. They operated that haul seine for about 10 years. It was dissolved, I think their last year was in 1945 when they operated it. But fortunately, we have some very good images of it because it was the largest, that was the largest haul seine to operate on the Chowan River north of Winton. These are some views of the Reed Rebel haul seine, and I'd say it was the largest haul seine to operate on the Chowan River above Winton. Sometimes the hauls would be like 25,000 to 40,000, and a few, and those sizes were common. Some of the hauls were over 50,000. A few were even over 100,000. That's a lot of fish. Hard to imagine, but that's what they were, large ones. There are two more views of the large haul seine that was operated on Chowan Beach by Ely Reed and Charles Rebel. Some of these photographs are credited to a man who really by profession was an undertaker, but he was also a very, very good photographer. Some of you might have known him. His name was Joe Holland, and he operated Holland's Funeral Home in Murfreesboro for years. But he also had trained as a he'd gone to the New England Conservatory of Music and Art in Boston and trained there for years. And when he came back to Murfreesboro, he opened a little photography art studio. And Charles Rebel got him to take some of the pictures, some of these images of the big haul seine at Chowan Beach.
That's a lot of fish.
Oops, let me go back. Got to go back.
Got it?
Yeah. On the left, John Askew was the seine master of the giant haul seine at Chowan Beach for many years. In the right image, it shows vats of freshly cut and salted herring at Chowan Beach. Now we leave the haul seine and we go to let me go back.
There you go.
Okay. Then we go back, we leave the haul seine and we go to fishing pound nets. This is Parker's Ferry Fishery, which was located at Parker's Ferry on the Marion River, and it utilized pound nets to fish with. I don't know whether you can really tell much from the far right image. It's shot down on the pound net, a design of it that shows that. But this particular fishery at that time was operated by Dennis and Loretta Layton. These are two images of Parker's Ferry Fishery, and which was on this site for over 50 years, and for 50 years or more, the Layton family of Eatonton operated it. In fact, one of the family members drowned down there. Right off in front of the fishery, the river had to be very deep there. I mean, it's like 18, 20 feet deep there, and one of the Layton family members accidentally fell in, and before they could get him out, he drowned, and it was a sad thing. You know? But these are images of the Parker's Ferry pound net crew fishing their pound nets on the Marion and Chowan rivers. The one on the left is on the Marion, and the one on the right is on the Chowan River. See, there's an art to setting the pound nets. I mean, you got to know how to not only build a design, the posts and all, set them to put them on, but you also got to know how to set the thing so that the fish, once they get in it, they won't get out. And this is another view of the Parker's Ferry fishery pound net crew fishing one of their nets on the Chowan River. This one had a lot in it, as you can tell from the fish floating around in it. It's just sad that we're not able to see that anymore. I mean, it was actually that was a part of our heritage, part of our way of life and culture that was that actually made this area what it was for a long time. Yeah, on the left, some of Dennis Layton's air dry herring, and what he would do, he would soak them in salt for about a day, and then he'd hang them up and let them air dry, and they were actually very good. They were they're sort of like, well, they're sort of like herring jerky. I mean, once you could peel the meat just right off the bone and just eat it. In the right image, there's a tractor trailer full of herring that were caught down at Parkersburg Fishery. And Tony Stephenson on the right operated this pine net fishery at Chowan, at Tuscarora Beach on the Chowan River for a number of years. And this is a better view of it. He, in fact, that was the first time I photographed him was when he was working in that one. And subsequently, as you'll see in a little bit, he moved from there and operated tunas fishery for a good while. But, Peter Griffith, who was one of my grandmother's brothers, operated a fish house at Tunis for many years. It may have been the forerunner of Tunis fishery. He is on the in the right image. He is shown in this 1946 image cooking herring with his nephew, Frank Stephenson Sr. Tunis was a major herring fishing village on the Chowan River, Hertford County for many, many years. This picture was taken May 5th, 1955, showing Lindsey Parrish Jr., a Chowan River pound net fisherman at his fish house at Tunis. The right image was also dated May 5th, 1955, and it shows Tunis pine net fisherman Tim Matheson, Brant Jeffries, Joe Williams, and Walter Jeffries unloading herring at the Parrish Fish House. Tunis fishery was one of the longest running pine net fisheries on the Chowan River. It was located at the fishing village of Tunis in Hertford County. In the very left image, Bob Schaefer standing on the right.
Mr. Stevens.
Yeah.
It's raining so hard. Could you use the microphone?
Yeah, right.
I'll turn it on.
Okay.
Let's see how that goes.
Okay, is that a little better? Okay. In the left image, Bob Shaver, who's standing on the far right, he operated Tunis fishery for a few years. Then in the right image, the pine net crews such as the one here with Joe Williams, Brant Jeffries, and Leroy Ewer fished out of Tunis for years. Brant Jeffrey on the left and his brother Walter on the right operated Tunis fishery for a number of years. I assume both of those gentlemen have passed away. Does anybody know anything different? I know one of them had died a few years ago, but Walter was still living 4 or 5 years ago. That's the last I heard from him.
He passed.
He did. Victor Perry on the left operated Tunis fishery for a number of years following the Jeffrey brothers. One year, Victor rented the fishery to a crew from South Carolina, and I don't know much about them. I did photograph them down there, but they only rented it for 1 year. Minnie Boone, who's on the right, was a herring cutter at Tunis fishery for many years. And Tony Stephenson took over the operation of Tunis fishing from Victor Perry and eventually purchased it from Perry. Tony remodeled Tunis fishery over a period of several years and operated it until his death in 2017. In the right image of this screen, Tony is on the left, and he's seen with Lynn Harrell fishing one of their pine nets on the Chowan River. For a number of years in the 1980s and 1990s, I was fortunate and deeply grateful for Tony for giving me an opportunity to photograph the pound net fishing operation at Tunis Fishery. Tony and his crew would get on the Chowan River around daybreak, as seen in this beautiful image, sunrise at Tunis Fishery. Some of those early mornings were really cold. We went up river and it had to turn your back to the wind to keep you to stay warm. This is another image of Tony of Tunis Fishery on the left, and then at the right of the screen it shows one of his boats going into the pine nets. And this is a Tunis Fishing pine net crew had entered one of its pine nets on, and that is loaded with herring. You can see them. They were just. Sometimes you would go to some of the pine nets and they would have hardly anything in it. Then you go to some of the other times they'd be just loaded up with them. I remember one time we walked pet ashore and fished a pine net that was loaded with just rockfish. I mean, hundreds of them. And what Tony did, because he couldn't keep any of them, but just a few of them, he actually let the side down to the pine net and just let them out, because it was just, it was a large number of them, and they were all sizes. I only saw that one time. Here again, in this image, the pine net crews are fishing some of the nets on the Chowan River in both of these images. You don't see this anymore. Two boats full of herring waiting to be unloaded at Tunis Fishery. And of course, he advertised in the Herald and the fish that were available at Tunis Fishery, and that's on the left. And then in the right part of that screen is just another boatload of herring waiting to be unloaded at Tunis Fishery. The left image shows Tony unloading. He had this crane-like thing to dip fish out, because he caught sometimes the boat would be so full, just be easy to unload with using this crane-like thing to unload them. And then once we got back to the fish shacks, always a hearty breakfast prepared by Shirley Stephenson was always waiting for the hungry pine net crews when they returned. This is the 1881 account book for the Petty Shore seine fishery that was operated by I think the people in Winton called the Jordan, like Jordan family. Some people call them Jordan family, but anyway, for the sake of that, we call them the Jordan family of Winton. A Jordan family which had a long relationship with herring fishing, also operated large haul seines at Chowan and Tuscarora beaches respectively. The Petty Shore herring fishery was the largest and most productive, with herring hauls well over 100,000. The seine was over 1,400 yards long and required a crew of 30 to maintain and operate it. The men who worked the seine received $1 a day plus 3 drinks of liquor. Yes, but well, anyway.
Had to keep warm. I guess it was cold.
That's it. I do it. The John seine, this John Hall seine had 2 seine masters, one on the river and one who handled the landing of the seine. They headed farther down the Chowan River on the west side. This is Ed Hollowell's fishery that was located on the Chowan River at Ewers or Hollowell's Landing. This is a picture of Ed on the left, and in the right part of the screen shows some of the herring cutters where he had down there. That's all gone. I mean, I was down there several years ago, and the whole thing had just fallen in. These are a couple of images of some little fish houses that were down in Swain's Mill, and on Swain's Mill Creek near Harrisville, in the lower part of the county. But as you work your way down on the west side of the Chowan River, you eventually come to Coleraine, which was the home of Perry Wynn's fishery, the largest herring processing plant in the world. It was destroyed by Hurricane Isabel in 2003. Now, all I got to say is it took a big wall of water to come upriver to destroy that place, so it was huge. And it just wiped it all out. It was amazing to see what happened to it. But I had been able to, and very fortunate, and very grateful to be able to photograph that for almost 20 years. And the family, the Winds were very, very gracious to let me photograph that. This is Lee Winds on the left. He was president of the company there for a number of years. And in fact, I used to go to my father down there. Even years before I photographed it, my father cooked fish motor. And I would go with him down to Prairie Winds to get either 50 pounds of rockfish dressed or 50 pounds of catfish. Or sometimes we would get them more than that. But he would cook fish mull out of that. So I got to know the place some before I actually photographed it.
Didn't they also can the roe and sell that all over
Yes,
the world?
yes. Yeah, they did the canning roe. Also packed salt herring in jars. They also packed it in what we would call large stands, as you'll see in a little bit. But, these two images are of some of the pine net crews unloading the fish at Prairie Winds. Go back on here. Okay, let's see. And once the pine net crews came in and unloaded the fish at Prairie Winds, the herring cutters took over, and they would cut them, and then they would, from there they would be salted down. There's another image on the left of some of the herring cutters. Now, the guys who fished the pine nets on the Chowan River, Prairie Winds, a lot of those were active farmers who lived in Chowan County and also in Bertie County. They would fish for herring on the side, but they would never know what they'd also catch in the pine nets, as the case with the image on the right hand side. This crew had caught a sturgeon. That's what that thing is, and I've heard people say that was the most ugly fish they'd ever seen. But anyway, there were numerous instances of large sturgeon being caught in some of the haul seines on the herring and Chowan rivers. There was a haul seine called Mudhole Fishery, which was located down the river from Williams's seine fishery about a mile. And when my father was about 10 years old, he was down there, and that morning they had run a net out across the river, and they had caught a sturgeon that weighed 1,400 pounds, and it took them almost all day to get the thing in. It was so heavy, and it was so long that it stuck out both ends of a farm wagon, not a cart, but a wagon. And he told me that, and then several other men who were down there a little bit older, he was also told me the same story. There were some herring fishing houses that stood at Coshocty Landing on south of Mary Hill on Coshocty Creek in Bertie County. They're all gone now because that land's been developed for houses. Then we go to the east side of the Chowan River, and that was a huge herring fishing site at a place called Cannon's Ferry. That was a lot of stuff there, more than I show here. These two images show part of what was the large herring fishing operation there. One of these you could back a trailer truck on, and then the other one you could back a dump truck on. That's how they carry the fish out of there. This was at a place at Cannon's Ferry near Tyna in Chowan County. This was also at Cannon's Ferry. Ed Ward had a fisher there for a number of years. At the same place, there were a couple of brothers, the Bynum brothers, and their father had a bottomless fishery, and the men were Herbert Bynum on the left, and then on the right was Bobby Bynum, and they fished there for a number of years. If you keep on down on the east side of the Chowan River, you would come to Murray Nixon's fishery, which was located near Eaton. Murray Nixon began fishing for herring when he was a young man, and he would put them in the back of his pickup truck and just go around and pedal them out in the back of his pickup truck. And of course, he actually parlayed that business into what you would know today as Murray Nixon Fishery, which is still running. This is Peel's Fishery, was located at Rocky Hawk Landing on the Chowan River. The fish houses on the right were located at Harris Landing, or some people call it Tinchtown on the Chowan River. This old herring processing facility was located at White's Landing on the Chowan River in Chowan County. Then we leave the pound net and we leave the hull seine, and we come to catching them with bow nets. And one of the most famous sites for doing that on the East Coast was Vaughn's Creek, which is located above the town of Murfreesboro, about a mile and a half north of Murfreesboro. And that was a big deal. When the herons came to Vaughn's Creek, people showed up. Showed up in droves, as you'll see in a little bit. But Vaughn's Creek was one of the most popular herring fishing places in the Chowan River region. The prime device used for fish for herring in Vaughn's Creek was the herring bow nets. Many herring bow fishermen made their own nets, while others could buy them locally, such as those made by a man named Johnny Shelton, who lived in Gettysburg. This sign stood in his yard for many years. Johnny Shelton. When the herring returned to Vaughn's Creek each spring, so did the herring bow fishermen return in droves. It was not uncommon to drive down to go to Vaughn's Creek, and both sides of the road, for as far as you could see, were cars and trucks belonging to people who were down on the creek fishing for herring with bow nets. The picture on the left, the gentleman never knew I took his picture, and he looks like he's just standing there listening for the herons. He's at Vaughn's Creek, just waiting to go down the hill to get in the water. But in fact, that's one of Barbara's neighbors, Ernest Britt. That was one of her neighbors, because she was the one who told me who he was. I didn't know who he was. But on the right image in the screen are two of the bow net fishermen headed to the creek in search of herring. And herring bow fishing at Vaughn's Creek provided opportunities for family outings, as this couple, they get ready to go down the hill to the creek, and he has his bow net and he has his tub. And as you can see in the background, you can see vehicles as far as you can see. It was a really big deal, and it's sad when you go out there and it's nothing going on. The herring bow fisherman on the left is waiting for a tug on his net, which let him know that there was a fish or two in his bow net, and then they'd pull it up and dump it. Then the herring fisherman on the right, in the right image of that screen, is using a wire basket. People use all sorts of things to dip up herons with. In fact, I've seen them use old laundry baskets. In fact, one time it was so thick, I saw people just stand in the creek and take their hands and shovel them up on the creek bank. And that were good times on Vaughn's Creek for these two herring bow fishermen. They just sitting there waiting and enjoying it. These two Vaughn Creek herring bow fishermen had some success while dipping for herring. Those herring bow fishermen who stood in the creek quickly exited the creek when someone upstream hollered, "A snake coming your way." And they got out real quickly. And once in a while, you'll see a moccasin swim by, and, you know. A couple of times I saw a couple of moccasins get caught in the bow net, and then people just threw the bow net off to the side. I don't problem with that.
Sure.
And the Balls Creek herring fisherman, he is using a dip net. I mean, people use mostly anything to dip for herring, and of course that was a narrow creek, shallow enough so that the fish are sort of funneling into a narrow area, and you could fish on almost anything to catch them with. Buckets of fresh caught herring at Balls Creek often led to some mighty fine eating on the creek bait right there. Cook them and eat them right there. In fact, they'd be mighty good right now. And residents of the Chowan River region could purchase stands of salted herring, from Prairie Wind, such as one on the left, or they could salt down their own, such as Ross Nickel of the early station section did, using the stone crock on the right. In case of bad crappie, as farm families depended on salted herring for food. On the left is a poem, like an ode a poem to the salt herring by Miss Pauline Wiggins from Seaboard. On the right is a sign advertising fresh herring at the Phantom Mart that stood on 258 north of Murfreesboro. Many local civic clubs, churches, and fraternal groups have benefited from the thousands of herring dinners that were part of the herring culture and way of life that was popular in our region for many years. Now it's time to come in and wash your hands for supper. Your choice today between a corn herring dinner on the left or a fresh herring dinner on the right. Either way, it's mighty fine eating. I would like to close by saying thank you. I'm so grateful to have a chance to be here. I also would like to special appreciation to my administrative assistant, Ms. Barbara Mulder, whose work with the images made this presentation possible. But I'm grateful and thank you for being here. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Stephenson for being with us today. I hurried through the introduction so fast I forgot to say anything about who he was, but everybody here knows who he is. Mr. Stephenson was born in Manny's Neck. He attended Murfreesboro High School, Chowan College, NC State, and thankfully he came back here. He is a historian, a writer, a politician, it says in here. He was also the chairman.
Not anymore.
Not anymore?
Not anymore.
Caroline laughed on that one. He was also the chairman of the Bicentennial Commission over 40 years ago. So we thank you for your time. He has his books for sale, and I'm sure if you ask him, he'd be glad to autograph them for you. We have some refreshments for you for some fellowship time, and I'd like to remind you that we'll have another Historical Association meeting here June the 19th. The speaker will be Dr. Janice Frick Rupert. She is a biology and environmental scientist who teaches at Brevard College. She has written a book about an Algonquin Indian boy named Skyko who grew up in this area before the English found this place. And there are great descriptions of the plants, the animals, and the life. So she'll be here to share that book with us. Also, Caroline Stephenson asked me to remind you that June 30th, is that date correct, Caroline?
Yes.
There is a Black History Tour in Murfreesboro. She has some flyers on the table over here. We also have flyers about our June 19th. There's a newsletter there and membership forms if you're not already a member. So let's have some fellowship.
Maybe.
Oh, yes.
Can I ask Mr. Stephenson some questions?
Yeah, please.
Yes, please do. Sorry.
I'd like to know, how did they sell all those herrings Back then, they didn't have refrigerated trucks, did they? How did they, where and how did they stop?
Well, a large number of herring that were caught then were shipped, a lot of them were bought by Perry Winds, and they packed them down, they salted them down. Later years, Mary Nixon bought huge quantities of them.
Is that where you sold yours, Miss Williams? Did you sell yours to Perry Wynn?
Yeah, there was some, so when we had a large quantity, we had dump trucks that would drive under and we drop them and they take the whole load. All we had to do was get them at a certain time, almost for nothing. Now you can't, well, you can't have herrings now, but when I could sell them, last time we caught them, we could sell them for $1 a piece. And now they won't even let us catch one.
And there's plenty in the road, trust me.
Yeah. It's a shame.
I understand that the fine, if you're caught with flesh
yeah.
herrings,
Can
the
you
fine
have them
is,
on your possession?
yeah, the fine is $100 a piece.
And the license went from $250, and now just for one boat, I'm paying $517.50 just to buy my license. If they come back,
Yeah.
I strongly feel like that herring fishing is gone.
Well, I think it's gone for a long time.
What happened to the herring? Why did it dry up?
Drugs are getting them.
Do you remember that spring in the 60s when they were lying dead on all the little creeks?
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, one of the reasons why the herring sort of slowed down was that has to do with the foreign cannon ships that lie off the coast outside of the territorial limits of the United States. And they know exactly when the herrings are coming down from off the maritime provinces of Canada, coming down to spawn. And they just clean them up and they can them right there. So that's a large part of what happened to them. And there were some other things, but nothing to the extent that would match what the cannon ships did.
Dumping them in fields and plowing them under didn't help us, right?
Do what?
When they were hauling them off and dumping them in fields for fertilizer, that didn't help.
No, that didn't happen either. They got a question back in.
What did they do with the sturgeon?
Well, I've heard different stories.
The caviar, does that come from the sturgeon?
Yes,
I think
yes.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was just curious.
Well, I really can't answer that question because a lot of it happened before my time. But I've heard that they ate the sturgeon meat, but they would not eat the sturgeon eggs. And one old gentleman told me not only would they not eat the sturgeon eggs, but they wouldn't feed them to the chickens because they would kill the chickens. So, I don't know. Yes.
Was one of the reasons, or a reason, that it was being overfished or that other industries came in? Which of those two was a bigger factor?
Overfish was part of it. Yes. Particularly if you consider the cannon ship thing, they would just sit outside the territorial limits of the United States and catch them before they even had a chance to come up the Chowan River to spawn. And then over a period of years, the migration numbers just kept falling off.
But wasn't there a business on the river for a time that was an environmental problem?
Well, there were a couple of them that were some fingers pointed at that in terms of pollution in the Chowan River. One was the Farmers Chemical Plant, and the other one was the Union Camp Paper Company up at Franklin. And a funny thing about that, which all the fuss that was made about, all the fuss that was made to Camp Manufacturing Company about their pollution of the Chowan River, they built this giant holding pond to try to hold the waste, but for whatever reason, they would release that stuff into the Blackwater River, which of course ran into the Chowan River. They would release it at a time that the herring were coming up the river to spawn, which didn't make any sense. Any other questions? I'll be glad to try to. Well, again, thank you. I'll enjoy being with you.